Okay, so it's great to see everybody. And as mentioned, I said I will share a joke. And the joke is, what is the highest form of flattery? Plateau. Okay. All right, it's a geography joke. Sorry about that. I just heard it today. So flattery. Okay.
Very
All
cool.
right, you get it.
Yeah.
Um, it's great to see you all as we start another chapter of Tanya, chapter 42. As I've mentioned a couple times, and I'll say it again, these chapters are, I would say, sadly, the least studied chapters of the Tanya, which really it should be the opposite because um, the Tanya, in essence, is really to teach us to love and have awe of God. Now, in order to get into that, we had a bunch of prefatory chapters, but the chapters of from 41 and on through 50 are really the chapters of how we do that. Not as in depth as maybe general Hasidic discourses, but it's the general idea of how we get to love and awe of God in a more practical sense. And so that's why it's such important chapters, because that's really the whole purpose of the Tanya. Another interesting thing to point out about the Tanya is I've said many times, each section of Tanya has its own powerful lesson in addition to being part of a broader theme. And it's definitely the way the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya. Originally, when he wrote the Tanya, he actually did not want to sell it in book format. He used to print it in little booklets, each chapter in its own booklet. So that tells you that each chapter and booklet, to a certain extent, is its own self-contained lesson, despite being part of a broader lesson as well. So both things can be true. On the one hand, it's um, it's part of a broader lesson. At the same time, it has its own section. Okay, so with that, let's preface chapter 42. Um, chapter 42. Thank you. Yep, we will get the YouTube post up. So after we learned in the previous chapter that awe is the basis of serving God, chapter 42 is going to explain how this level of awe is easy for every single one to reach. And we're going to base it on a line from the Talmud that says, fearing God is easy. Um, and it's going to explain we each have a spark of Moses within us. And because of that spark of Moses within us, therefore, it's easy for us to reach a level of awe of God. Just parenthetically, there's a Hasidic band who made the song "Little Bit of Moses in Me," eighth day. Uh, um, that's what they're basing it on. They're basing it on this chapter of Tanya. I'm just going to pull it up just to show you. And of course, the grass people are right outside my door right now, just to make sure that they are driving us crazy. But I hope you don't hear it. But I'll just show you over here on the screen. So again, they started with this video. It's called Eighth Day Moses and Me. And again, it's based on this idea of this chapter that each and every single one of us has a Moses inside of us. Now you might ask, what do you mean? Don't we all have a spark of God? Like, what's this bit of Moses inside of us? We'll get to it. We'll explain it. Okay, all in due time. What's the addition of saying you have a little bit of Moses if we already have explained in Tanya that you have a spark of God, right? What's the difference? If you have a spark of God, why do you need a spark of Moses? And um, and the answer really gets to the crux of of Tanya, how Tanya views the path to connection with God. And having the spark of God is one thing, but having the spark of Moses gives us an even greater, um, an even greater possibility to reach to the level of awe, as we will explain. So let us start off inside the chapter. Again, welcome everybody. Chapter 42. Let's start over here, page 523. Uh, in, oops. I guess I should just, all right. In chapter 41, we touched briefly upon the Zohar's distinction between lower reverence and higher reverence. At lower reverence, you feel the awesome presence of God and you are eager to fulfill his will. A higher reverence, your sense of his presence is more arresting and you are simply overwhelmed by God. We explained that most of us will not reach the higher reverence except at special occasions. We didn't, we didn't talk too much about higher reverence in the previous chapter, and we're not going to discuss it here either. First, we need to discuss lower reverence more thoroughly and explore some additional techniques to acquiring it. Why? Because lower reverence is much more possible for most of us. So though the Tanya is going to discuss both, because they are both possible, what's more likely is the lower reverence. So again, last chapter explains the necessity for awe or reverence, why it's so integral to our divine service of God, and how awe is not enough. We also need love. But this chapter is going to get to practical tools, and he says like this. Now, based on what we have explained above in the previous chapter about lower reverence, which is a basic requirement for all mitzvah observance, positive or negative, we'll be able to properly understand what's written in the Talmud in its commentary on the verse, "Now, O Israel, what does God your God ask from you? Only that you revere God your God." Now, when you read that verse, okay, it's basically saying, it's like imagine a parent comes to you, the parent comes to the child and says, "What did I ask you already? Just to clean your room? How hard is that?" You know what I mean? So that's the same meaning of this verse in Deuteronomy. If you read it simply in context, all it's basically saying is God comes to Jewish people and says, "What's God asking of you already? Just to fear him. How hard is that?" And the Talmud says, wait a second. Is reverence really such a small thing? Is reverence and awe of God so easy that you could say, what's a big deal? All God asked you was to have awe of him. Okay, so the question is a good question, right? The question is, God makes it sound like fearing him is a simple thing. Now, I don't know about you, but personally, awe of God doesn't come so natural and easy to me. Maybe it comes to you. Now, obviously, if we had awe of God naturally, we'd automatically do everything that God wants. And that's basically the meaning of the verse. If you have reverence of God, awe of God, you'll do everything right. So in other words, God is not asking you to do 630 commandments. All God asks you is to have awe and reverence. Automatically, once you have awe and reverence, you do all 613. But my question is, or I shouldn't say my question, the Thomas question is, I didn't know that awe is very easy. I didn't know reverence is very easy. So the Talmud gives an answer. All right, let's see how good the answer is. So the Talmud says, giving a great answer, the Talmud says, yes, for Moshe, our teacher, it's a small thing. In other words, you want to know how the Torah says fearing God is easy. We know it's not easy, so the Talmud answers, well, it is easy. For Moshe, it's easy. And Moshe, this is Deuteronomy. Moshe is the one that wrote this verse. So that's why we could say it's easy. Now, the Talmud continues, as we'll quote in a moment, but 1 second. This is not a message for Moses. I mean, Moses is writing it, but it's a message for everybody. It would be like an adult coming to their kid and saying, how come you didn't, all I'm asking you is to do, 10 times 45. You're talking to a 2-year-old. Yes, for you, it's easy. 10 times 45 might be easy, right? 450. But for the kid, that's not easy. So what's the Talmud's answer? How is the Talmud answering us? All God wants is fearing, and fearing is easy for Moses, but it's not easy for me, right? So what does knowing that it's easy for Moses help us? That's what the question that the Tanya asks. But the answer doesn't seem to make any sense, since the verse stresses, what does God your God ask of you? Not what does God ask for Moses? So to answer this question, the Tanya draws in a mystical teaching that some of the energy of Moses' soul can be accessed by all souls of Israel. Now, as I said in my preface, we'll have to explain soon, as the Tanya will explain, we already have a spark of God. What does having a spark of Moshe help? But let's first indulge over here in understanding the idea. What does it even mean that we can each have a spark of Moses inside of us? Okay? So it continues. Rather, the explanation is that every single soul in Israel has available to it an element of the soul of Moshe, our teacher of blessed memory. Tikkun Zohar states that Moses' soul extends into every single generation, into every righteous person, tzaddik, and scholar who immerses himself in the Torah, even to the entire generation, 600,000 of them. So this is a quote of the Zohar. This refers to a spark of Moses' soul, which extends into the tzaddik or scholar when he is studying Torah to help him understand its correct intent. Rabbi Chaim Vital expands on this idea beyond the context of Torah scholars to all souls which are included in Moshe. Since it is from his soul they are derived, they are all sparks from him. So souls are like branches. We're branches of a different soul. So to some extent, we're all branches of a soul of Moses. So in other words, the earlier people who explained the Zohar said the Zohar only means that someone who studies Torah, there's a spark of Moses helping him understand the Torah. But Rabbi Chaim Vital seems to say that the spark goes to everybody regardless of study of Torah, meaning it's not limited to only the study of Torah. The Tanya will argue in this chapter that the Talmud's statement that reverence was a small thing for Moshe, our teacher, was referring to the spark of Moses within your soul. So now the Talmud makes sense. If the Talmud says, yes, our reverence of God is easy because it's easy for Moses, and you also have a piece of Moses, then automatically awe of God should be easy for you. But first, the Tanya cites a further source for the connection between Moses' soul and the souls of Israel based on the Talmud and the Zohar. So as I've always said, the Tanya is written both for the scholar and the layperson, and a lot of times the Tanya will spend time proving his point from different scholarly sections. So this is one of those examples. For according to the Talmud, in Tractate Sukkah, Moses is one of the 7 shepherds of the Jewish people. Who are the 7 shepherds and what is their function? The Zohar teaches that corresponding to the 7 divine emotional attributes God created on earth, truly worthy men to sustain the attributes and to illuminate them on earth. And they are the fathers of the world, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moshe, Aaron, and David. And by the way, anybody who celebrates the holiday of Sukkot, you will note that these are also the 7 guests that visit us on the holiday of Sukkot. They're called the Ushpizin. I don't know if you've seen the movie Ushpizin, but Ushpizin means guests. And so these are the 7 guests that visit us on the holiday of Sukkot. And people wonder why these 7. So obviously, if you look at their names, they're some of the greatest teachers. But more importantly, we each need to embody a certain level of them, because each and every single one of them is an embodiment of one of the 7 divine attributes. That's why they are so important. For example, the Zohar, it says, I think it's the Zohar that says that the attribute of kindness complained to God and said, Abraham has taken my job. So Abraham was so kind. He was the embodiment of the divine attribute of kindness in this world. So when we embody divine kindness, we are embodying Abraham. Abraham, so to speak, brought down the divine attribute of kindness into this world. The divine attribute of judgment comes through Isaac. The divine attribute of beauty comes through Jacob, and so on and so forth. That's why these people are so important. Let us go back inside. Okay. The 7 shepherds cause the energy and godliness to flow to the souls of all Israel. That is why they are called shepherds, who tend to their flock and feed them with spiritual powers. According to the Kabbalah, these 7 shepherds are responsible for shepherding and nourishing the light of God, the light of God's emotional attributes into Malchus. Malchus is the 7th one. Malchus is the one that, so to speak, actualizes all the 7 attributes. And since Malchut, kingship, which is the 7th attribute, and again, sorry, I've been telling everyone my... okay. The Shekhinah, Malchut is also known as the Shekhinah, is the source, page 525, of Jewish souls. As we learned in chapter 41, the 7 shepherds nourish us directly, strengthening our ability to have love and reverence of God. So again, if there are these 7 shepherds, and they all feed into Malchut, which Malchut is God's eminence, God's presence. And the Shekhinah, which is Malchut, is the source of our souls. That means that these 7 shepherds, via Malchut, are nourishing our souls with the 7 heavenly attributes. And the 7 heavenly attributes include love and awe of God. But let us continue. But why then do we only need a spark of Moses' soul in order to worship God properly? Why don't we need a spark of all 7 shepherds? The Tanya will explain, while each of the shepherds can nourish a particular attribute in our soul, Moses, our teacher of blessed memory, combines them all, nourishing all the attributes, and that is why through the Zohar he is called the faithful shepherd. Let me show you over here the map of Sirot so it makes a little more sense. Um, so is this one? I mean, that's one of them. Okay, yeah, let's show you on a screen. So I think you're seeing what I'm seeing. Let me open this in open image, a new tab. Let's take a look at this image as it is big. So here you have the 10 attributes. Das, okay, they're kind of writing it differently. The point is though, you have all these different attributes, but they all end up coming through Malchut. Okay, Malchut is the one that brings it all to us. Um, a lot of times we don't count Keser. I don't know why they put Keser as number one. It's really number zero, but that's another a story for another time. That's how you get to 10. But anyways, the point is that um, all the 10 sfirot, they are fed to us through Malchut. So that is why, and the same thing goes with 7 attributes. So 10 includes all the intellectual and emotional, but the 7 attributes include just the 7 emotional, which the final one is Malchut. And Malchut is always, so to speak, it's like the one that gives to the next level. We usually say Malchut is like the lowest of one and the highest of the next. That's typically how it does. So it gathers everything from before it and passes it on to the next. And so that's what we're going to say about Moses. That's why you only need the spark of Moses, because Moses is gathering from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Aaron, Joseph. He's gathering from all of them and giving them to us. That's why we only need Moshe's spark inside of us. And let's continue. That is why throughout the Zohar, he is called the faithful shepherd, being the archetypal shepherd who fulfills the function of all of them. So in the Zohar, he is not, again, there are the 7 shepherds, but throughout the Zohar, Moses is called the faithful shepherd because he's the one that gives us everything. Why is Moses able to nourish our souls with all the emotional attributes, in contrast to the other shepherds who are limited to a particular attribute? That's because Moshe causes Daas, okay, we'll explain Daas in a moment, to flow to all the souls of Israel. As we have learned, the transition from thinking to feeling takes place via the agency of Das recognition, a process through which ideas become personally relevant. By nourishing our Das, Moses' soul influences the entire range of our emotions, enabling us to worship God. Let's just pose on the Das. We discussed it in chapter, is it 7? Gosh, I'm forgetting now which chapter it is. There's a chapter that discusses Das, because Das is such an important one in the Tanya. Das is discussed in chapter 3. Yeah, it's discussed in chapter 3. Okay, discussed in chapter 3. So Das, what we know as knowledge, right? There's Chokhmah, wisdom, Bina, understanding, Das, knowledge. That's the acronym for Chabad, by the way. And Chokhmah is the light bulb idea. Bina is the cognition of the idea, understanding the idea. So if you have the idea and then you've broken it apart, what does Das do? And Das is when you enable that to connect to your feelings. Just give an example. Let's say there is a sad event that happens. So there's one can know the sad event. That's like the chokhmah. That's terrible. This person passed away. Then there's bina. You can understand just how sad it is. There were people relying on them. They were big charity people. They passed away young. They suffered. Whatever the details are, you can go through the details. And it's still possible you can understand and know all this and yet still not cry. Why? Because there's a disconnect between what you know and what you feel. And some people are better at Das than others. And we can all work on it and get better with it with time. But that's the idea, is that there's a disconnect between what you know and what you feel. And that's the function of Das. I'll give another example. Many people study Judaism. And so the general and then they can even understand deeply how Judaism is good for their lives and why it's the right thing. But still, they're still going to spend their Sunday morning, instead of praying, they're going to sleep in and then watch the ball game and totally skip any moment of prayer. Why? Because Das has not penetrated them. Another negative example of this, it says there are people in the medical field who make bad medical decisions. How is that possible? Or dare I say, there are even rabbis who may sometimes make wrong decisions, right? How is that possible? because though a rabbi may be knowledgeable, he is human like all of us, or at least most rabbis are, and he may be lacking in the area of das. And in fact, the Tanya says this is really Chassidus talks. This is really the idea of a bar mitzvah. What happens at a bar mitzvah? It says a bar mitzvah boy or a bat mitzvah girl, they become a bar das, someone who has das. What does that mean? It means you can have a brilliant child. You can have a child of 10 years old who's smarter than the bar mitzvah kid, knows more Judaism. But what changes around the bar mitzvah at maturity is the ability to connect what we know to what we do. Children are, I want to say, naturally more self-centered and selfish, especially when they're babies. As they get a little older, they can slowly break out of it. And when someone becomes bar mitzvah, they have that ability to break out of it fully. Now, to live life not just for themselves. Now, does that mean they're no self-centered adults? Of course they are, but at that point, it's a choice. It's not just their emotional maturity. So with all that being said, so Moshe, Malchut, if we looked in this, let me look at a little line over here. So Malchut, if you notice, is also aligned with Das, which he calls number 11. So they're kind of interrelated. And so we're saying here that Moshe, who is Malchut, is, so to speak, also the Das, the wisdom, understanding, knowledge. And that is the ability of Moses to take everything and actualize it in our lives. Okay, that's what's special about Moses. Leida es Hashem kolecha. This enables each individual to have Das of God. But to the extent to which you succeed in acquiring Das depends on the three factors. By the way, we have now answered our question we started with. I asked the question, if I have a spark of God in me, why do I need a spark of Moses? Well, Moses is the spark that allows you to connect with your spark of God and with whatever you understand about God. But now it continues. And he's going to tell you, though you have a spark of Moses in you, that assists your personal Das. But what is your personal Das depends on who you are. In other words, we find some people that are more naturally emotional, some people that are less naturally emotional, some people have an easier time, some people have a harder time. What is that based on? Here he gives you the Kabbalistic answer. It will be according to your soul's own cognitive abilities. So everyone has different souls. And B, it depends on your soul's root above. So where is it rooted in heaven? We explained in the earlier chapters that, for example, Hillel, who was generally more lenient or kind, shall we say, was rooted more in chesed, in kindness, and how Beit Shammai, who was known to be more strict, his soul was more rooted in gevura. So the ability of your soul's das depends on the root of your soul. Where is it rooted in the heavenly spheres? And C, it also depends on the level from which your soul can draw energy from the root of Moses' soul. In other words, your ability to pull from Moses' soul will also depend on how much das you can pull. So it's the old saying, nature and nurture. How much, part of our issues with das, part of our inability to connect what we know with how we feel, part of it is nature, but obviously that doesn't absolve us, and we still have to do nurture. So let's read it here. Obviously, the das of Moses' soul does not replace the das in your soul. It merely enhances whatever is already there. So even with this assistance, you're still limited by your soul's powers, both in terms of nurture, how well your soul's matured intellectually, and nature, your soul's spiritual root, and the level of its access to Moses' soul. Just for example, imagine you go to a therapist. A therapist can only allow you to reach your full potential, not what's not your potential. And that's what he's saying here. In other words, even though Moses' soul, his das can help you, but he can only help you reach your fullest potential. And your fullest potential can be different than someone else's. But now he says, what gives Moses' soul the ability to nourish your das? What is the special power? Moses' soul being rooted in the supernal das. Again, supernal das would be over here, okay, up in heaven. That's the root of a soul. Remember, we spoke of root of souls. Okay, I think I have the same page twice. Okay, Moses' soul being rooted in the supernal das. Let us delve further. And all right. Someone asks, is Das associated with feminine energy? Good question. Obviously, the implication being, as we know, women have a more natural propensity to emotional ability. I haven't seen that, no, but it's an interesting question. So I have to do more research, but not from what I've seen. Um, okay. But what it could mean is they more naturally have more das. But das is not necessarily a feminine energy. In other words, God may endow them with more das, generally, even though it's not necessarily a feminine, even though it's not a uniquely feminine energy. Okay, let's continue. So for Tanya, we have learned that Das acts as an intermediary between the intellect and emotions. Das internalizes your thoughts, so they become personally relevant. By the way, just backing up a second, we know that the women get the Das when they're 12, the men get it at 13. So they have a year, always a year ahead of us, right? That's why they have a bat mitzvah. So they definitely get Das earlier and more natural. Um, but again, I don't think it's a specific feminine energy. So far in the Tanya, we've learned that Das acts as an intermediary between the intellect and emotions. Das internalizes your thoughts so they become personally relevant, and that generates feelings. That's the important part, personally relevant. You know, the great example in Hasidic philosophy goes like this, just so you understand Das in another way, because that's an important word. He said they become personally relevant. The story is there was one time uh, a simple farmer. He got a letter, but he couldn't read the letter because he was illiterate. So he went to the local town rabbi or whatever scholar in town, and the scholar read in the letter. And in the letter, it said in great detail how the farmer's father had died. And so it was a shock to the farmer. The farmer faints. Okay. Now Hasidic philosophy analyzes the story and says, what do we mean? Who understood the details of the letter better, the farmer or the guy reading the letter? The guy reading the letter, he knows how to read. He understands language better. He understood the details of the nuances of everything that's written. But yet he's not the one that fainted. And this proves us again, because what makes the emotional connection is not the understanding the details as much as the details being personally relevant. If the details are personally relevant, then it then it becomes a connecting idea and can affect how you feel. So that's what he's saying. Das internalizes your thoughts so they become personally relevant, and that generates feelings. The process follows a strict hierarchy. Your innermost will and desire informs your intuition, your chachma. So that's what we call the light bulb of inspiration, which is then analyzed by cognition, which is bina, and made personally relevant by das, leading to emotions. As long as the information is personally relevant, then it leads to emotions. There is, however, so that's usually the way we talk about it. The way to get to emotions is to have the idea, think deeply about it, make it personally relevant. There is, however, a second pathway through which Das can receive from Keser directly, enabling you to feel the super rational desires of your soul without any substantive intellect pondering first. This direct pathway from Keser to Das is referred to as accessing the supernal Das. So what he's going off here in the Tanya is he's telling us that there is another way to have emotional feelings, and it skips everything. It skips everything. You see, if you look over here, um, if you look over here, Keser to Das. So usually usually have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, they put 11 because Keser is really higher than everything. But he's saying there's a way you can go straight from here to here. That's what he's telling us right now. There's a second pathway, which most of us don't usually get. Accessing supernal Das doesn't mean you completely bypass your intellect. It's just that your chokhmah, your wisdom, and bina, cognition, quickly align with the preconceived conclusions of your Das, which is received from Keser. It's as if your emotions are flowing directly from Keser and just pass through chokhmah and bina on a journey to your heart. Supernal Das then has the power to bypass hierarchies in the metaphysical realm. In this case, it short circuits Keser to Das, effectively bypassing Chokhmah and Bina. Okay? So again, well, why is he going off over here? He's just telling you that he said Moshe's soul is rooted in supernal Das. So not only is Moshe Malchut, but he's also rooted in the supernal Das. And supernal Das, as we're reading here, has the ability sometimes to bypass and short-circuit connections between higher states of mind and lower states of mind. And he continues, Moses' soul, rooted in the supernal Daas, is able to shortcut the consciousness of the 10 spheres of Atzilot down into the souls of Israel below in this world. Again, these are the 10 spheres of Atzilut, and Moshe, by being rooted here in number, what they're going to call 11, enables him to kind of blast into us special feelings. Now, I would say that's generally not how it works, but it's a possibility sometimes. The reason why the physical world distracts us from the awareness of God is because we have lost the consciousness of Atzilut. In Atzilut, the highest of the four spiritual worlds, God is real and tangible, while the physical world is a distant dream. Can you imagine such a place, right? Where the world seems far off, and this world is, I think people before they pass away, it says they get that feeling. It writes about in the Tanya, that they stop seeing the world as physical and they see the word of God, and the physicality of the world seems less to them. In this world, the opposite is true. Physical reality is obvious and real, whereas to find God, we need to enter the imaginative space of the mind. Not that God is imagination, but we don't physically see him. Since the same as, by the way, when you need to see your cells and everything, you can't see them with your physical mind, you need to imagine it. Since it's like some people, when they wash their hands, they're imagining the germs, even though they don't see them, but by virtue of the imagination, they feel dirty and they wash their hands really carefully. It's the same idea. By virtue of imagining God, which is real, we can feel the reality of God. Since Moses' soul is rooted in the supernal Daas, it can provide a short circuit for our souls to access a glimmer of consciousness of Atzilut, making God's presence, um, making God's presence more real and tangible to us. While the vision may not be a clear one, it definitely gives us a boost in the daily challenge of trying to worship an invisible God in a world full of physical distractions and temptations. So he's giving a second idea here. His second idea is, number one, Moshe in general gives us the power of Daas. And number two, Moshe has a special power of Daas, which is to connect us to a reality that's beyond us. And though that vision is fuzzy, but there are times, I think, where we connect more with the spiritual reality than the physical. As he says, in Atzilut, all God's attributes are merged with their emanating source, and it is a place where he and his Daas are one. His point here is if you're connected to Daas, you're connected with everything. And he has simultaneously the power to know, the knower, and the knowledge. God himself is absolutely one, devoid of any multiple. Okay. I'm not going to read all this, but the point is that in the world of Atzilut, in which we see the reality of God, there's also a merging of all the divine attributes. So automatically, if you have the Daas of Atzilut, then automatically you get this high level of clarity. I spoke about this on Shabbos a little bit, actually, in my sermon, that what the Rebbe gave us and gives us is the ability to see the world in a spiritual light. In other words, to us, we're in the hole climbing out. We're inside looking out. We live in the physical world. To us, the physical world is the main reality. And we're looking ways to see that there is a reality beyond our reality. And the Rebbe, when you read all his talks, looks at the world totally different. In other words, people want to know, how did the Rebbe encourage and get his Hasidim to go out to far-flung places, which today they're much more connected. Back in the day, don't forget, people would go places. When you would come here, when my parents came here in '88, there were nothing Orthodox. The only, there was a Chabad in Tampa and a Chabad here. And other than that, you had to go to Sarasota. And then nothing else on the West Coast. Okay, so on the whole West Coast, there were 3 Chabad rabbis. Kosher food, we got a weekly delivery truck from Joel's. And nobody really knew what went on. To speak to your parents was a long distance phone call. It was very disconnected. So how do you enter such a world where the world around you has such a, people weren't reading Chabad.org and finding Judaism in many different ways. How do you enter such a world and tell them there's a greater truth out there? And that's what you get from the Rebbe. The Rebbe, when you read his talks, you would see how he would view the world, how the world was there just to serve God. one of the foundational ideas of Tanya is teaching us that God recreates the world every single moment. Why is that such a foundational idea? Because when you feel how every single thing is being recreated by God every single moment, there's no obstacles. This this person, this door, this city council, whatever it is that's getting in your way, they're being recreated by God at this moment. So it's for God's mission. Maybe the mission is to challenge you, but it's being recreated by God every single moment. So when you would read the Rebbe's talks, and he would give you this outlook, his world outlook, that there is really nothing that's a true obstacle to God. And in other words, he was living in a world where the truth is godliness, which is the truth of everything. And this world is a cool facade. Okay? This world is a cool facade. And that's the ability that Moshe can give us, this ability to look past our noses, so to speak, and see and connect with the reality of the world of Atzilut. Where in the world of Atzilut, God is the true reality and this world is not. And this is what he's going to continue right now in the Tanya and telling us that not only do we have the spark of Moses of the old, but we have in every single generation, we have a Moses of every single generation. And that Moses in every generation gives us that ability in every single generation. So let's read about that over here. And furthermore, we receive additional influence from Moses' soul through another pathway. So we have three pathways of getting Daas from Moses. Number one is Moses' Daas helps us use our own Daas to make things that we know and understand personally relevant. Number two, Moses has this short-circuited Daas, which is connected to Atzilut. It's a fuzzy look. And now number three is going to say there's a Moses in your generation who will help you not only in a more spiritual way, but physically lead you and guide you in such a way. Up until this point, the time has been discussing how Moses' soul influences your soul directly. But the connection has been a relatively weak one. You have only been able to draw energy from Moses' soul, but his soul did not actually enter you. Now we will discuss another type of influence. I'm not sure about his writing. I explained it differently. But anyways, now, this is commentary. Now we will discuss another type of influence where a spark from Moshe's soul actually enters a human being here on earth. This won't happen to you directly, as is something experienced only by the sage of every generation. Huh? You're going? Okay, have a safe trip. Okay, safe trip, yes. But by learning from contemporary sages, you will be able to receive an additional influence from Moses' soul in a more tangible way. So let's read this. Because in every single generation, there is not only the distant influence of Moses' soul, but actual sparks from Moses' soul came down and became enmeshed in both the body and the soul of the sages of that generation, the sages of each generation being the eyes of the congregation. And these sparks of Moses' soul empower the sages to teach Daas to the people, enabling the people to have Daas of the greatness of God. And through this Daas, they will be empowered to worship him with heart and soul. The influence you receive from Moses' soul via the contemporary sages is more powerful and tangible than the direct influence you receive from Moses' soul. Since A, in the contemporary sages, an actual spark of Moses' soul is present, and B, the spark is embodied even in the physical presence of the contemporary sage, the body and the soul of the sages. This additional power of the contemporary sages to nourish your Daas is stressed by the Tanya, text of the Tanya here. Above, when discussing the direct influence, okay, I'm not going to get into it. Okay, let me just pause here. I want to point out something very important. Because I started off saying this is why we need a tzaddik, a Rebbe. And in fact, the Rebbe, 2 days before his stroke, when the Rebbe stopped speaking in 1992, the Rebbe gave out not 2 days before. He gave out dollars then. The Rebbe used to give out booklets of Hasidic discourses that he edited. And the last one he gave out was on Purim Katan, Little Purim, which was about 13 days before his stroke. So, so to speak, it's considered the last parting message of the Rebbe. And we know that the Rebbe took it very seriously. For those who know the distribution, the Rebbe gave out much more than usual and waited and kept giving it out as he was walking away from the podium, giving these little booklets of his discourse away. And the discourse is called Va'ata Tetzaveh. And the content of that discourse is really what we've been reading about over here is the job of the Moses of each generation. That's really the message of the entire discourse. The job of the Moses of each generation to give this level of Das, which what is Das? If we were to say simply, Das is the ability to see, is to make spirituality reality and physicality a distant second. That's really the purpose of Das, or Jewish Das, right? And so the whole discourse was about that idea, and everyone took it as a parting message that even though um, we may not hear the Rebbe anymore, see the Rebbe anymore, the Rebbe is still giving us this level of Das. So you might say, how do we still get the Rebbe's Das? How does that happen? And in the discourse itself, there's some answer, though obviously you have to read between the lines because it was written in a time when the Rebbe was still talking. But I would say that by virtue of the Rebbe's teachings and videos, in other words, we haven't had a sage. I told someone this the other day. Imagine we had all the recorded talks of Moses and all videos of Moses and everything else. We'd be watching it to be inspired. How much, so we have, when you look at the Jewish history, the Rebbe's scholarship and reach is unparalleled for generations. Okay, it's a generational special soul. Okay, how many souls have and had a worldwide influence like that? Um, that was unique, and the Rebbe scholarship and new way of looking at so many different areas of Torah studies. But by virtue of all the Rebbe's talks, in which, again, you get that idea of the way he looks at the world. And if you say, well, you don't watch the Rebbe's talks themselves. So first of all, there are ways to do it. For example, there's the weekly Living Torah Chabad has. They put together the first video, at least, is very nice modge podge of lessons of life lessons the Rebbe taught. But also, all the Chabad rabbis you listen to are all really building off of the Rebbe's teachings and teaching them in different ways. But that's really obviously, and if one becomes a bigger scholar, one can study the Rebbe's words themselves. But when we study the Rebbe's teachings and words, they allow us to see the world from a different perspective. And that's what the Tanya here is talking about. Tanya is talking about the ability to connect with a leader of the generation who is an embodiment in this physical world of that level of Das. And Das being the world of Atzilut, the world in which God is the true reality and the physical reality is the distant second. Okay. All right, now that Tanya is going back, now that Tanya has explained to us that uh, the Das is what allows us to translate our thoughts and our understanding into feeling, which what is the feeling we're aiming to is getting to awe. The Tanya then explained how do we get Das? It comes through Moses helps us get the Das, right? Well, let me back up. Let's recap how we started. We started off saying from the Talmud, we said the Talmud tells us awe of God is easy, right? And the Talmud asks, how is awe of God easy? The Talmud answers, because it's easy for Moses. So the Tanya asks, but we're not Moses. So the answer is no, as we're getting to. Moses is the level of Das. And as long as we tap into our Das, having awe of God will be easy. In other words, why is awe of God difficult? Because though we may know about God, we may understand God, we're missing that crucial Das. And so that's what he's going to get here is the most important part in our service of God is Das. If you want to be able to serve God with love and awe, if you are missing Das, you will be missing in your love and awe of God. That's the short answer. That's why Chabad is called Chabad. In other words, you can find many teachers who will teach you about God, and you can read many books about God. But Das is sitting and finding ways to make that information personal. So let us read inside where he reminds us again what is so important about Das. Let's read inside. Tanya reminds us why Das is so crucial. For the quality of your heart's worship is proportionate to your Das. In other words, you can have someone that's a great scholar in Hasidic philosophy, the philosophy of godliness. But if they have poor Das, the quality of their service of God can be much less than someone who is lesser scholar, but has more das. As the verse states, Da et Elokei avicha, know the God of your father, and then you'll be able to worship him with a perfect heart and a yearning soul. So, faith alone, without das, doesn't compel you to worship God. The Torah, the Talmud illustrates, so in other words, you can believe everything is godly, but you may also still be very nervous every single day. The Talmud illustrates this with the example of the burglar who has entered his tunnel to commit a burglary, and he prays to God that he won't be caught. The burglar believes in God, but that does not stop him from violating God's commandment, don't steal. He even prays to God for success in his burglary, asking God to help him violate God's will. Without Das, you can easily slip into a state of cognitive dissonance, where you're willing to perform an action that is contradictory to your belief. Cognitive dissonance is one of the greatest words that they have created. And if anybody ever wonders why in their divine service of God they are experiencing cognitive dissonance, in other words, what do you mean I believe in God, I know God, I study about him, why do I have such trouble following him? The answer is you're missing the level of Das. If you're missing the level of Das, you are going to experience cognitive dissonance. That's why we find that in Egypt, even after the people believed, it was then necessary for the people to have Das, that I am God, right? So we have, if you read the story of the Torah, right, after the splitting of the sea, it says they believed in God. How is it that a few days later they complained again to Moses about God? If you believe in God, trust in God, because belief is not enough. Without the Das, there's a disconnect. So in other words, they believed in God. They knew God is real. They knew God saved them at the splitting of the sea. But they still felt emotionally scared when they didn't have food to eat, when they didn't have bread, when the water was bitter. Though they believed in God and knew God could take care of them, their heart told them otherwise, because they did not connect what they believed to what they felt. And so they felt scared. They felt worried. And so they came all up in arms to Moshe. What are you trying to do? You're trying to starve us. And you think, well, you just saw God split the sea a few days ago. The Torah tells us that you believe in God. They do believe in God, but they did not work. You have to work on this. This is why I tell people all the time. People ask me all the time, Rabbi, how is it the Jews in the desert did so many issues when they saw God? And so I ask the person, I've had this with people, I say, have you ever experienced the miracle of God? And usually they'll say yes. And I say, and are you still doing everything God wants? And they say no. Why? The answer is because there's knowledge, and there's the emotions, and there's the lack of Das. Though the person experienced a personal miracle in their life, feeling God saved them, but on a day-to-day basis, we allow our emotions, our natural emotions, our animalistic emotions to run us and run our day. Maybe not all of our day, but some of our day. And we need to work on our Das to connect what we know to how we feel. And as the Tanya explains at length, this is generally what prayer is about. But that is the problem that we all face in our service of God. And, so if we're talking about we need to have awe of God and fear of God, you cannot have that discussion without discussing Das. We can study about God all day. We can learn as much as we want about him. But if we don't spend the time making that information personally relevant, then that will remain as information and will not change our lives. Let us read in here. Das enhances your emotions for God with consistency and integrity. Without the Das, you might love God 1 minute and then love something inappropriate a minute later. It's very possible. Why? Because right now you're excited, next moment you're excited about something else. We find people have this, no greater contrast about this than the end of Yom Kippur. I understand after Yom Kippur everybody's hungry, but the gusto with which we run to food seemingly incongruous with the great spiritual state we were at before. Now, it's not saying I never do this myself, but it's not a problem of eating. Eating is fine. It's the way, the manner in which we eat, which means we've gone back to our animalistic state. And that is because though we may have had Das while we were praying, it wasn't strong enough to continue to the moments when we're hungry and we could eat. So what happens? So until Mashiach comes, we will always suffer with some level lack of Das. There will always be a disconnect. Our job is to lessen that disconnect. However, as the Tanya is going to end off this section of the discussion, it's going to say, but in the future era, when Mashiach will come, we will have sufficient Das of our own that we will no longer require the influence of the sages, as the verse states. No longer will they need to teach one another, saying, "No God," for all of them will know me. Until that time, however, we are all dependent on the sages of our generation to nourish our powers of Das in order to worship God properly. And by the way, dependent on the sages does not mean that they do the work. It means they teach us how to do the work. That was one. If anybody knows the Rebbe, that was one of the biggest things. And Jonathan Lord, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs famously said, right? Good leaders create followers. Great leaders create other leaders. This is the whole version of Chabad versus other Hasidic groups. Chabad was always into the Rebbe guides you in your personal divine service, but you have to do the work. So yes, the Rebbe helps you in your das, but it's work that you have to do. We're going to study next week about how do we attain das, and it's through meditation and prayer. And that is why in Chabad, meditation and prayer is so important. That's why Chabad was famously known for long prayers. And in fact, the Alter Rebbe used to send messengers to his Hasidic followers in their communities, and he would send spies to see if his followers were praying at length. If they were working people, they had to pray at length on Shabbat. If they were non-working people, they had to pray at length every day. And you'd say, why would the Rebbe bar people coming from visiting him if they didn't pray? I'm going to throw out my personal thought and answer over here. And my personal thought and answer is his time was precious. And he's basically saying, I'm not wasting my time. If you are coming to me because you want to follow the path that I am teaching and you're not putting in the work, what am I having you coming for? It's like someone keeps showing up to the doctor and asking what to do. And the doctor tells them, you got to exercise and you got to take the medicine. And they don't do it. So the doctor says, well, why should I want to see you? Why should I have you come here? You're not doing anything I'm telling you. What's the point? To waste my time? Waste your time. So the Alter Rebbe sent his follower, his spies, so to speak, to his communities, make sure that people are praying. Why was that of the most important things? Because that is the true key to divine service. How much you learn, that's important, yes. But how much you pray and how much you meditate about God is the key to everything else. And without that, we're always going to be lacking. And our lives are going to be full of inconsistencies. Our lives are going to be full of emotions that run amok and pull us in all different ways. And we need to focus to take what we know about God and to make it personally relevant to the point where it affects our emotional state. And that is the truest and surest way to serving God with a long-term success and with gusto and feeling, because that's the other reason why we need to have Das. In other words, it's conceivable that someone will do everything God wants them to, but not because they feel close to God, but because that's how they grew up, or that's their social pressures, or they're scared of God ruining their life, whatever it is. But God, as we mentioned in the previous chapter, wants that we should serve him with the feelings. And to serve God with the feelings, as we spoke about in previous chapters, the ideal is to allow your thoughts enter your emotions. We said sometimes it doesn't work, but now he's teaching us how to make it work and what's the best way and shortest path to that. And that is, of course, Das. So join me next week as we explore how to bring Das into your life. And I look forward to seeing you all again the following week.
Thanks, Rabbi.